Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to contribute at this report stage of the Overseas Operations Bill, and to do so as early as I am in following the Right Honourable Member for Halton Price and Howden, and indeed a number of the contributors who have spoken thus far. I have to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, I know time is tight on proceedings, but had the member for North Durham spoken for the entirety of this side of the House debate, I think members would have been largely content with that. And I don't say that to annoy the government. I was very clear on second reading of this bill that whilst we support the bill, there are many aspects of it that could have been, and I regret were not, improved at Bill Committee. And I'll make this broader point at this stage. Just because government has the strength of votes does not mean that government has a monopoly on wisdom, and does not mean that government should not engage more productively and proactively in some of the concerns that have been raised. And I don't say that belligerently, Mr Deputy Speaker. I don't say that to cause difficulty. Those who have served with me on the Defence Select Committee know that I approach these matters sincerely, but because we want to see the right outcome and the right protection for our service personnel. And I'm afraid that following the Bill Committee, we aren't quite there yet. And we have that opportunity this evening, Mr Deputy Speaker, to make necessary amendments. I will repeat at this stage, although not part of this bill, that I resent the fact that Northern Ireland provisions have not been brought forward. The Minister gave me a commitment at second reading, and I'm glad that he did, that government will not resile from the commitments that they have given to veterans who served in Northern Ireland, and I accept that progress of those provisions are out with now, regretfully, the Minister's domain. But that commitment is still there from government, and we look forward to see how they will honour it. Certainly will.
Thank the honourable member for giving way, but would he recognise that there already is an international agreement called the Stormont House Agreement to deal with issues of legacy in Northern Ireland? It seems now that the government is determined to abandon that agreement and abandon the victims of the conflict as well. Does he agree that that's a sensible way to proceed? That the government will again abandon an international agreement?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I have to say that the contribution from the honourable member for Foyle is timely. We know what commitments were given during the New Decade New Approach Agreement on legacy matters in Northern Ireland, and we wait to hear from government where they are, and both of us have engaged in conversations most recently about where that may go. Whilst we may wish it to go in different directions, I'm not sure either of us may be overly satisfied with what emerges. Mr Deputy Speaker, I do want to touch upon a number of key aspects within this bill. And I saw that the Minister, with his normal enthusiasm at the weekend, talked about some of those seeking to amend this bill as being deeply disingenuous, repeating campaign lines, talking a good game, but fundamentally unwilling to lift their finger to protect service personnel. He made those comments. I share them because I want to say categorically they do not accord to me as a signatory of Amendment 1 to 10, and nor do I believe that they appropriately accord to others who have signed the amendments either. I think it is right to say people are being disingenuous if they think that war crimes or genocide are issues that are precluded under this bill. They are not. They are clearly included within Schedule 1. But I think the government is wrong not to refocus and think again about torture. Torture should be exempted from the proceedings or the provisions of this bill. And I say that very clearly, drawing on the comments from the Right Honourable Member for New Forest East. And he was right to reflect that Section 3(2)(b) in this bill does draw upon investigations where there has been an investigation before, cases where there has been an investigation before. But what it doesn't do, and what it should do, and what I referred to at second reading, is rule out the provisions of this bill being used where there hasn't been an investigation at all. can it genuinely be the case that where there are issues raised around torture, where there hasn't been an investigation at all, that we accept the presumption against prosecution should be engaged? I don't think so. I have quite clearly, and alongside the Minister as a member of the Defence Select Committee, argued the point that where the state has discharged its duty through a satisfactory investigation, then we can seek to protect our service personnel from prosecution, but not before. And we're asking the Attorney-General to make the determination through the provisions of this bill. That's the very same Attorney-General who will be asked to agree that because this bill is being used, our service personnel have to go to the International Criminal Court. That can't be right. It cannot be right. Take these issues back to St Aquinas on what a just war is, and he considers the morality of war. We as a country stand firmly against torture. When we engage in armed conflict, we operate on the basis that we share those values, that there's an international norm. Our guys will not be tortured because we give a clear commitment that we will not torture theirs. That goes with this bill.
It's making incredibly strong and important points. And does he also not agree with me that it potentially undermines our standing in some of the key institutions which we are party to internationally? You may not be aware, but we're actually chair of the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture subcommittee. It's actually a gentleman who was a graduate of Llanrumney High School in my own constituency who chairs that on behalf of the United Kingdom. We have a key role to play in those international institutions in setting standards for the world. And if we undermine that in this Act, we do great risk to Britain's reputation globally.
I think the honourable gentleman is right that there is that huge danger, because government is not tearing up our international obligations, and I accept that. Government is not resiling from the obligations we have internationally to say torture is wrong, it is abhorrent, it is immoral, and it is not something that we will engage in. And I agree with the government on that. But if that is their position, then why not close the circle in this bill? Why leave it to others to determine in the International Criminal Court when those issues should be determined here? And I say very clearly again, Mr Deputy Speaker, in the context where there has been no investigation at all, that cannot be right, be it 5 years, 10 years, or whatever else. So I will listen to the Minister thoughtfully in his summing up and hear what he has to say about this. I know he has the strength of numbers, I know he can push it through, I know he can reject the amendments that are down, whether it's amendments 1 to 10 or amendment 32. But I would ask him to reflect seriously upon them. And just finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I do think that the Right Honourable Member for North Durham has dealt with this issue well in his amendment, New Clause 1. But New Clause 1 should be what this bill is about. Not dealing with the prospect of a prosecution 5 years after the fact, but dealing with repeated investigations again and again and again before the provisions of this bill are ever engaged. And that door remains open. We know some of the Northern Ireland cases that are going through the courts at the minute, so don't even involve a veteran, elderly, frail, but have also included dawn raids on an elderly and frail veteran from service in Northern Ireland in the 70s and 80s. That's outrageous. But none of that is precluded within the terms of this bill. And that investigations issue, I think, is worthy of further exploration during today's proceedings. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.